Okay, good afternoon. I want to add one other problem with not having a live session is that we definitely need the cocktail hour, and we're not getting that. Um, so, first of all, thank you for everyone who made today possible. We got a lot of really great comments. We had over 300 registrants, so we're excited, and a lot of requests for the recording to be sent out, which will be in a couple of days. Special thank you to Miguel Martinez from our IT department, who somehow managed to make this all work. And also Mandy Kaplan, our director of marketing, who probably sent all the speakers a million emails, who came and agreed to come back for a second bite at the apple. So thank you. Also to my partners in crime, Kim Kempton Sarah and Greg Bloom. This is a lot of labor and appreciated. Also, all of the speakers especially, and all of the other GW attorneys who helped out. It's really incredible how much content was put out. And when you look at the channel of how much this is going to be sent out, it's a work of art that we should all be very proud of. To the registrants, if you are not listening to this, if you're listening to this live, there's a chat box and you can put questions. We have gotten some throughout the day. I don't think it's going to be, we're going to be able to get to even a fraction of them, but feel free to reach out to the participants, also to the speakers. So speakers, you all have a lot of knowledge. So if a question is asked to somebody else and you want to crosstalk, definitely do it. Bob Getling, no name calling. Roy, that goes for you too. But other than that, feel free to make this a lively, I don't want to say debate, but discussion. And just remember that you're going to be enshrined because this is being recorded. And so with that, I'm going to grab some water, but I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Greg Bloom. And also, just keep your microphones on mute. And then when you're talking, obviously take it off. So Greg, take yourself off mute and then go for it.
All right, I'm off mute, and I'll reiterate, thank you all for being here and for all the great presentations. We know it's a lot of work, and we appreciate it. I'm going to start off our questions by turning to Rich Searles of Merit Healthcare, who, Rich, thank you for pitching in at the very last minute. Matt is caught on a plane, and he's pinch hitting, together with Bob Getling of the Bloom Organization, who spoke about the current state of healthcare transactions. Thank you both for participating. I found it interesting with the state of the economy that you guys had said that you didn't think it was significantly affecting healthcare transactions. Rich, with that in mind, do you still foresee more consolidations in the upcoming year? And do you think that that's going to create economies of scale and assist with cost cutting with the economy how it is?
Yeah, Craig, thank you for having us on. I will answer your question by not answering your question, typical Matt Searles form. Just kidding.
He coached you well, huh?
Yes, I do. And maybe I'll take it in two separate transaction assets. One being maybe the surgical centers, surgical hospitals, that vein, right? We've already seen a ton of consolidation over the years in terms of who your partners or buyers might be. So that concerns me less. Since 2008, there's been a lot of consolidation in that area specifically. There's a lot less players, and it hasn't necessarily driven down valuations. But I will say this: it has gone are the days where an out-of-network, center on the fringe of profitability is able to sell at a good valuation. Those days are gone. However, the profile of a good in-network diverse center, valuations have not decreased over the years with the consolidation in the market. So I continue that to continue and expect those trends to continue. Now, as we turn to the physician practice side, I think everyone's hands get sweaty with interest rates going up. And looking at the private equity players out there who are more involved on the physician practice end and have been consolidating over the last, 10 years, more recently in all sorts of specialties, not just derm or ophthalmology. And I expect maybe a similar consolidation on the buyer end as well, where you have larger players who are well capitalized, not so reliant on debt and not so levered, where interest rates aren't affecting their cost of capital, not affecting valuations. But with that, I'll probably close my mouth and let others chime in, like Bob and Roy.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. It was very interesting, and actually leads into a question I was going to follow up with Bob. Given the economy, do you agree that you haven't seen people? I would have thought that there'd be some lowball offers, the economy going down, people in a rush to get out. Do you think that's coming in the next year? And if you do, any ways you think that the sellers can protect themselves from these artificially low valuations?
Yeah, Greg, as I said, I don't, I can't predict the future. I happen to believe that the major driver for all this consolidation on the physician side is not the monetization. Again, monetization's a big, is a big benefit of it, but I don't think it's the main driver. And so, if we see it with interest rates coming up, the valuations start coming down. I don't think it's going to. Yeah, sure. There's a few deals that it'll, that docs will change their minds about doing it. But I think in Moss, the ideas and the reasons for doing it they're going to continue, and I think they're going to only get more. So I think I think you're going to still see more of the consolidation. As far as the low ballers, hey, we've had those, and those they've been here. They're not going away, and part of the low balling thing is sometimes the buyers or prospective buyers, they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know, and so they don't even know they're low balling. Others, it's a distinct business strategy, and for the ones that it's a distinct business strategy, the way for physicians to protect themselves against that is be very diligent, especially on the first parts of the process, which are getting their numbers together, getting all their, more than just the tax returns and their balance sheet from their accountant, but really getting the story of what the group is today, tomorrow, and next year. I think that all helps to keep the low ballers out, or to at least keep them honest. And then the final point I'll say that I think is becoming, at least on the bigger groups, is becoming more popular, is the whole concept of doing what's called a sell-side quality of earnings. And for those of you who don't, in the audience who don't know, in these processes, what happens is, you go through, you pick who, the physician group picks who they want to do a deal with. They sign a letter of intent, which basically just says you can't date anybody else and you have to be exclusive with us. And then they call in the quality of earnings firm to look through everything and say, hey, those numbers on which we valued those on are accurate. And if they don't, and again, there are some buyers out there that play as part of their strategy to get into the quality of earnings with the expectation that they're going to trade down on what the purchase price was. Well, one of the ways that you can prevent that is for the physician sellers at the beginning, before they ever even go out to market, bring in a quality of earnings firm and conduct their own quality of earnings before they go to market. And then at least those, keeping those out, those retraders out, and the low ballers, you've got a justification for doing that, because you have a quality of earnings and numbers that you're showing that have been proved out.
Can I offer some thoughts as well? This is Roy speaking.
Go for it, Roy.
Well, firstly, I agree with Bob. Lots of good comments there. So thank you, my friend. I also want to say that in a declining macro environment, there's all kinds of interesting things that happen. There's books written about presuming too much as far as the aggregate of anything is concerned and the wave of anything is concerned. And it's always important to dig a little bit deeper than just the wave. So things that are strange in declining environments are flights to quality. So you see our currency, the US dollar, as an example of that. The worse the environment gets, seemingly the more valuable the dollar gets. So why are there these negative corollaries that exist in very depressed environments? And you go down the path of asking some really interesting questions. What drags down the price of a practice to some extent is a function of how much people were overpaying before, which speaks to how speculative was all of this, which speaks to fundamentals, growth rates, true EBITDA, cash flow, and audience. Who were the stakeholders that were allocating capital? Were they speculative investors betting on maybes for businesses that don't generate earnings? Or were they private equity aggregators building better businesses? And the second question I would ask as to whether or not we're going to be heavily impaired here or far less than others is, what was the nature of the capital that we were relying on? Was it sticky long-term capital, or was it flimsy day-to-day, minute-to-minute, mark-to-mark capital that scares easily? And so we are a different industry. We're a different segment within a different industry than other industries that have seen 50, 75% price corrections overnight. That doesn't mean that leverage multiples haven't contracted. They clearly have. But it's just to remind everyone that just because there are large waves out there doesn't mean that you're not a surfer.
Like those analogies, and with that accent, Bob Getling, you can't compete. So you're out. You're out. All right. So let me, from that financial discussion, let me take it to the practical and move to human resources. So Andrew, Marianne, it was so interesting looking at, when we were preparing for this, looking at last year's HR discussion. It was all about vaccines and masks and whatnot. And this year you returned us to some very practical, what to do in certain situations kinds of things. So let me give you one of those. I'll start with Marianne. So Marianne, this happens, I don't just think in healthcare organizations, but I think in every organization. Two people get into it and no one else witnesses it. They're yelling at each other back and forth. Then it ends up being that one makes a complaint on the other, and you have to adjudicate between two people, and you have no idea who's really at fault. So not that that would ever happen at Garfunkel Wild, because everything is peace and love here, but theoretically, if that were to happen, how do you start to unravel that?
All right, so it's still the same process. You can't jump to conclusions. You undergo the investigation to the extent possible, right? You talk to the two people that were involved, the participants. You speak to any witnesses. Sometimes there's video cameras. Pull that footage, preserve the footage, because that might be relevant down the line. And at times, most investigations, it's he said, she said, she said, she said, whatever combination of individuals. And so you got to do the best you can to try to figure out credibility. But at the end of the day, what I try to counsel people that if people are engaging in a public inappropriate display, no matter who is the initiator, right, it's not acceptable. And so maybe you'll determine that one person was the initiator and maybe a little bit more aggressive, but that doesn't mean that both individuals don't get disciplined to some extent. Sometimes you're walking them both out the door. Sometimes, they'll both get an equal warning. But where I've seen things go wrong is that people make a knee-jerk reaction, send one person home, leave the other person there because they may view that person as maybe better than the other one. And then you'll wind up with like a discrimination type of complaint or unfair treatment. So don't make my advice is always go through the process, even if it's expedited, get as much information as you can. If you really can't confirm who was at fault, they both get disciplined for the public display. in the office. The other thing too, it's a reminder, make sure your policies are in place. Make sure you have those conduct policies and reporting things, because then you can cite in the disciplinary action that you knew arguing in front of patients or raising your voice or whatever it might be was against our policies. You knew you should have gone to a supervisor or manager to intervene and de-escalate the situation, because quality of care is paramount first. Getting into an argument with your coworker has to take second, seat, regardless if you think you're right or wrong. And train people on what the expectation is. Train people on your policies, train them to say, look, you get into a dispute with someone, come talk to me. Don't escalate it. So I'll leave it at that unless, Andy, you want to jump in and say anything further on that topic.
Yeah, just to add a couple of points. One, in these altercation scenarios, as Mary Ann said, you don't jump to conclusions, because the information you get at the inception of an issue is not likely going to be complete, not likely going to be accurate. And in these altercation dispute contexts, oftentimes there's a backstory or a history that led up to that moment that may inform you on how you're going to proceed in terms of resolving that issue or resolving bigger issues that may have existed that just culminated in that particular dispute.
Yeah, and I would think also, this might sound self-serving, but if it's a really particularly nasty one, you might want to go to an outside attorney or an outside HR specialist, that somebody doesn't say, oh, you're always favoring that person, etc. So Andrew, I'm going to ask you one more. So I'll pick on Mary Ann. It's not true. Mary Ann's out, claiming that it's some medical issue. She's out for 2 weeks. And you've requested as the employer a note, and you're not really sure. You always request it because that's your policy, but you don't really trust Mary Ann. I don't blame you. And now she wants to come back, or she's due to come back, but she still hasn't provided that note. Do I need to get it, or do I just let her come back and say, all right, whatever?
This is one of those scenarios that comes up and has been coming up with even a greater degree of frequency. The person who's out on leave, it's extended, lack of documentation. And here, there are some real traps for the unwary. And documentation is really the key in helping you navigate properly and minimizing the risk of a litigation or some form of dispute. One, you want to send out a FIMLA notice if there's reason to believe that a serious health condition is involved. So you want to go through your checklist and hit that. You want to also check to see what kind of leave this person has left or what they may or may not have exhausted. Do they have PTO, sick time, and the like, to see if some of that time can be applied against their request for additional time. But very importantly, you want to engage in a dialogue with that employee. One of the hottest issues Mary Ann and I and the other employment lawyers at the firm have been seeing is this interactive dialogue process with someone, in the context you described, Andrew, is out on leave. Maybe they exhausted leave, but they still need more time. And the knee-jerk reaction is, you're out of time, you're out of luck, you're out of a job if you don't return. If you want to engage in a dialogue at the onset about how long they may leave, may need to stay out on leave. I think you said they may want to stay out for an additional week or so, or they say they may be returning another week or so, and follow up in writing requesting that medical documentation, and state that approval of their request is not going to come their way, unless you receive that medical documentation substantiating the need to be out, plus clearing them to return when they're able to return. And, you want both parts of that, with regard to the paperwork involved. And then also importantly, let them know if they need accommodations. And one form of an accommodation could take the form of this extended leave. They should let you know, and again, provide the supporting medical documentation to substantiate that request for an accommodation. Once you have that, continue that dialogue. If you create that document trail, if you engage in that interactive dialogue I just mentioned, what do you need? How reasonable is it? Is it going to create an undue hardship for the employer? And you document that conversation, then you can take the position, if they don't come through with the documentation, or something that, passes the laugh test, then you can take appropriate action and say, no, the absence not authorized. And if you don't come back, you're terminated.
Okay. All right.
I think-
Yvonne, go ahead. I'm sorry, Marianne.
Yeah.
It's okay. And you don't necessarily have to terminate the person, right? It could still be a disciplinary action. Let's say you don't want to immediately jump to that step. It's corrective action, as Andrew said. So, and the document trail in this particular case, I would want to make sure it's not just probably the text message or the quick email. I usually like to do the chronology. As you know, you've been out on leave since X day. You need to provide supporting documentation. If you need any accommodations, please let us know. We'll schedule time for us to discuss it. Like, lay out all the things Andrew was saying in a letter format and send that across so you have an easy document trail. We're not piecing together emails.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. Sorry for almost cutting you off, but we have a lot of panelists. Want to make sure we get to everyone. And as Andrew took me away from the financial aspects to the touchy-feely, or with Andrew and Marianne, actually non-touchy-feely portion, I'm going to go back to the business and ask some questions to Max Reibold of the Coca Group and Roy Bergerano of Scale Health on the business side. Max, in your presentation, you mentioned the importance of reverse due diligence that years ago, not too many people were really focusing on. What information should a selling practice ask about a PE company or another buyer in conducting this reverse due diligence? I think you're on mute, Max. Oh no. We cannot hear you. Can anyone else hear?
I can't hear him either.
Well, he's sorting that out. Roy, why don't you take that question?
I was going to say, I'm sure Roy can chime in.
Can you repeat the question? Reverse engineering due diligence?
The reverse due diligence was spoken about in your session, and asking what a selling practice should be looking at from the buyer when they're doing reverse diligence.
Oh, what a great question. Almost as much as the buyer should be looking from the seller, which we all know just doesn't happen. So the long list of things that I would think about, obviously the buyer's business plan for the business, as much information as possible. I think that's relevant whether you're selling 100% or 1%. Obviously the sensitivity goes up, the less that you're selling and the more that you're retaining. But as every lawyer on this phone knows, the liabilities and obligations, there's a tail to all of that goes beyond a full exit. The history of the buyer in great detail, much more than their slide deck PowerPoint presentation. But beyond selected references, can you get deeper? In the days of LinkedIn, there's ways to communicate with all kinds of people out there. Who that buyer knows, who that buyer has done business with, and what the word on the street is regarding that buyer's reputation, reliability, history of litigation. So these are all very important things. And know your buyer the way that the buyer wants to know the seller. Familiarity with the space, the more the better. It doesn't mean that everyone who hasn't invested in an oncology business should be disqualified. But there is a difference, and people need to recognize between buying your 5th DSO and buying your first. Obviously, the differences in categories, the difference between being a strategic buyer and being a platform, first-time private equity buyer, speak to a very different trajectory for everything that builds from there. Strategics are interested primarily in integration. What else? I mean, I think it's a long list, and I think the most important point that I would put across to the seller is it's difficult in a banquet process to do all the work that needs to be done because time is not your friend when you're trying to get a transaction over the finish line, and everyone and everything is pressured to move as quickly as possible. But who you sell to is ultimately more important than how you sell and what you sell for, in my personal experience. And so it is important to try to find the time to really unpeel that onion.
I think it's both the time, and a lot of sellers are not as willing to turn that over. They look at themselves, oh, we're the money people. We'll ask the questions. But I think your point is, your and Max's point are really well taken. You have to do the diligence and know who you're selling to and what you're getting from them in return as well.
I think that's a really good flag. If someone's reluctant, cagey, overly controlling over the interview process, that tells me a lot.
Right. Hey, Max, are you able to chime in yet? No, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulty.
You know what? We can come back to Max when he tries to. We'll come back. We don't have to go in necessarily sequential order.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay. So, Justin, where are they? Yeah. So, Justin, you.
Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. So you scared the hell out of me when you said that it's not a question of when. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when you get breached. That's my biggest nightmare, to come in one day and find that everything's ransom and there's nothing I can do. So I have a million questions about that, but a very practical one is, in all of our businesses, healthcare and non-healthcare, we have a lot of vendors, and you made that point in your presentation a lot.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to ask the vendors for an annual questionnaire, like refreshing their security situation, or is that just never going to be filled out?
I think the level of due diligence you do on your vendors, whether it be annual, whether it's spot check or at the point of procurement, there should be something. Specifically to your question, I don't see the harm in asking for an annual assessment. When was their last HIPAA assessment? If they are high trust certified, when was the high trust renewed? But I do think providers have an obligation to monitor their vendors and do the due diligence to assure that the vendors aren't going to be a liability and somehow not safeguard their data as well as they should. So
Okay.
It could be an annual assessment. That is definitely a means.
Okay, so Stacy told me not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stacy, and I guess thanks for nothing, Andrew.
Yeah, we're in virtuous. So, because this is my nightmare, and you had a statistic, I forget what the percentage is, but a certain percentage, like 70% of the people who pay ransom don't get back their data.
Yeah.
Right? So my question to you is, if it were your company, not Mazer's, I know you can't speak for them, okay? Well, it's my company, and I call you up and I go, should we pay the ransom? Yes or no? Yes or no?
I mean, it's a great question. I think it's a difficult question. Stacy, in her presentation, made references to a lot of the data forensics and the consultants who could come in. I think the first step before you pay the ransomware is we're going to make an assumption that did they really take the data? Very often it's a threat. For example, maybe all of you have seen these emails that you get where it says, I know your password is blah, blah, blah. And they hacked into some program that you used 30 years ago, and you might still be using that password. And then they reference about how you're going to go into your Facebook and this and Social Security, but they don't really have the information. It's just an empty threat that they found an old password on some program that you used that had a similar password. So to answer the first part of the question to answer is, and I don't mean to avoid it, is did they really even take the data? We recently had a client who was hacked, and they were a contractor to a managed care plan, and the criminal actually did get in, and there was notification of the breach. It was an actual breach, but they didn't really get any data. So through the data forensics, we realized that they were hacked. We had to report it to the managed care organization. We had to, the managed care organization had to report it to the state as well as to CMS. But at the same time, the entity, the vendor who was hacked, we recommended to not pay the ransomware because they didn't really get the data. And a lot of times it's an empty threat. If they do get your data, I don't know. I don't know what the plan is. I guess you do pay. I do pay your ransomware if you're. I mean, it's an expensive. You're going to be fined by OCR, or ultimately, if you're a vendor, you might lose your contract, reputational. If they have your data and there's damage control, I think, but you have no choice.
Yeah, I tend to agree too. Okay, so Stacy, see, I don't listen to you all the time. So Stacy, so now Justin advises me to pay the ransom. I pay the ransom. I actually get it back. It's one of these good, evil criminals. Okay, I get it back. Do I still have to send out breach notices? I got it back.
Oh, absolutely. If they had it, there's not even a question. If the bad hacker had the information such that they could return it to you, the OCR would absolutely expect you to handle that as a breach. I think the question you're really thinking about is if we know that the hacker went into the system, but we can't tell whether they saw anything. Like, so once they extract the data, we know they saw it and you have to handle it as a breach. There's no question about that. But if they get into the system and just take a little bit of information, right, as proof of concept, but like a gray hat hacker would do. But we don't know if they actually looked at any other information. Do we have to say that all of the information in our database has been impacted?
Right.
The OCR has come out with guidance that says that if there is a ransomware attack, you presume that the bad actor saw all the information. But if you get a really good forensic analysis, they might be able to disprove that concept. Or I have seen some forensic consultants or clients argue that there is honor among thieves, and that if the thieves say they didn't take anything and didn't disclose anything and didn't see anything, we can trust them or they would go out of business. I don't know if I would go that far, but those are the types of arguments I have seen to argue that there is a low probability of compromise if you're not sure what the bad actors saw.
Wow, interesting. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Picking on one of my favorite presentations this year was Karen. We got a lot of very interesting feedback about the comparison between the aviation industry and the healthcare industry. If you missed that one, I think it's I don't know if they're going to make it into a Netflix movie, but it's definitely interesting to listen to. So, but you talked about learning from your mistakes and near miss and all of those things. And I took your overall point is that the healthcare industry as a whole needs to get together and cooperate and work together because like the aviation industry, we can learn a lot from our mistakes and hopefully prevent them. I think the figure that you had was startling, how many people died from mistakes. I think it was 330,000 Americans a year or something like that. It was crazy. So my question to you is, I like the concept, but given all the questions, and I'm curious, Stacy too, because she deals with this as well, but given all the litigation issues that are out there, and as you say, the punishments for people who do bad things in healthcare, but on the other hand, we have some peer review protections. Can we get there? Can we get, you're positing a wonderful ideal, but can we get there?
Thank you for the question. Really important question, and something we've been talking about for quite some time, right? In the risk management / patient safety world. My first response is we have to get there, right? We absolutely have to get there. We can't continue the cycle, the culture that we've been in, particularly in healthcare, where we understand what's happening. We understand that errors and mistakes are occurring and people are actually dying. Family members, loved ones, could be someone related to us, right, are actually dying. And we are missing the opportunity to share from that information. We are not learning from it and being transparent in the way that we need to be in order to create improvement and prevent these types of tragedies and mistakes from happening again in the future. So we need to get there. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if I'm going to see it in my life. Many of us have been talking about this for quite some time. We need to accept, though, that this is a fact. It's true. Research, evidence, everything we know will tell us that transparency, openness, and acting upon events that occur will prevent future events from occurring. We cannot make progress unless we get there. So it is very difficult. We are, from one perspective, concerned about privilege and confidentiality issues and protecting practitioners, of course. And on the other hand, faced with the actually moral and ethical issue of preventing patient harm. And we know how to do that. We know how to use that data and that knowledge to prevent harm. So there are some things we can do. And one of them actually is to figure out how to work together. I'm not giving you the answer, right, on how to do it, but we need to figure out how to actually work together to get there. And we can go from one extreme to the other. I've worked with risk management departments on one extreme that wouldn't even allow the hospital to have a daily huddle where their management team was talking for 15 minutes for fear that somebody might record it. And we're talking about basic operations and basic functions of a hospital business. Hey, we had a safety event last night. No names, no information disclosed, but everybody take a look at your heparin. There was a mistake with one of the Pyxis machines and the way we loaded it, and we're working on that, but be extra diligent in your practice today. Be alert, something like that. So that type of extreme where we're not allowed to do that, or a physician who was involved in a significant adverse event, to not allow that person to participate in the root cause, or to say they can, but anytime we talk about the care that physician provided, they need to step outside of the room. So some of this concern about the litigation and our reaction to me and to many in the safety world kind of defies logic, because we know that if we share and if we prevent mistakes from occurring, we will also prevent litigation, So we need to work together. I think one of the ways that we can do that, first of all, is all of us getting together and accepting that we need to change the culture, but educating our clinicians, educating our leaders, and kind of back and forth on how do we actually talk about errors when they occur? What's the right way to disclose so that we avoid further pitfalls, but actually set the tone for more successful outcomes. And there are studies, there's lots of research and evidence out there that shows that actually if we are open and transparent, and we have those relationships with the patients, even before their hospitalization or procedure, we're setting the tone for improved outcomes. But after bad events occur and adverse events occur, if we have that type of environment, and I know we can all go find whatever data we want, but there's a lot of research out there that says it will actually decrease claims and decrease the money we're spending on liability. So something to think about. But to work together to do that, to also work together to remove some of the constraints and the difficulties around patient safety organizations, right? And how do we work collaboratively to make sure we can submit data and submit learnings into our PSOs and widely disseminate that, right? But so just working on the culture, the education, teaching our clinicians how to speak together. Patients, educating the patients on what is a realistic expectation. And at the end of the day, we need to get it through our head that healthcare providers, clinicians are human beings, and these mistakes are going to continue to occur. So I believe we can get there. I have to believe we can get there. Long-winded answer. Not sure when that's going to happen. We're seeing, very slow progress, in my opinion, very slow progress. But, we're all still fighting the fight because we know it's the right thing to do. And when we have to reach that place, Andrew.
So I feel guilty about being a lawyer. So because I'm involved in the litigation world, although I don't litigate. So Stacy, you seem to think, because Karen, you caused us to have internal debate about it. Stacy, you seem to think that there are some important steps. Karen mentioned patient safety organizations, but they're not required, right? You don't have to be in one. So do you want to speak to that?
Well, yes. No, I mean, the patient safety organizations is a great concept, but as you said, they are not required. They're totally voluntary. So they're helpful in states where there is no QA or peer review privilege. They allow for the exchange of information without the threat because you get a federal privilege. But I do think in addition to patient safety organizations, at least in my time, and I've been doing this a long time, I have seen increasing discussion and positive impacts. And I'm not saying it's perfect. And I totally agree about the fact that medicine is really is really an art more than a science. People just don't seem to get that. And that some of these new cases that have come down the pike that limit what a physician can say, the performing physician can say during a root cause analysis is really troubling to me as well. However, there are mechanisms in which people do share information at local, state, national levels. American College of Surgeons, you have a whole ton of data that everybody who has a tumor registry must input. And that based on the information that provides, they send out a lot of guidance. New York State has NIPORTs, right, where everybody submits certain types of incidents. And depending on the degree of harm, there has to be a root cause analysis those things are compared. The state sends out guidance, that type of thing. The Joint Commission, sentinel events, same type of concept. In order to be a Medicare participating provider, you have to participate with Joint Commission, or DNV is the other popular one, but let's go with Joint Commission. Joint Commission came out with a lot of the guidelines for wrong side surgeries, how to prevent against them, expecting to see that type of thing. So there are venues to have these open discussions. Could they be improved? I don't doubt that, but I don't think there's nothing. And I have seen through the years improvement. When I started out as a risk manager in 1994, I think, people were a lot more closed-mouthed at that point. But now physicians ask me to sit in all the time so that they can have a little privilege against their physician practice discussions. People do want to learn. I don't think that there's anything against that.
All right, so I'm going to jump in because we could do it. You guys could have a play date afterwards. But,
that was a perfect adjunct. Absolutely, there are some mechanisms for sharing. So we both agree on that. Just we need to improve.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to some of our other panelists. We'll go to our panelists from Common Billing Mistakes, Alyssa Schickel and Simon Chakler from Garfunkel Health Advisors. Alicia, a lot of providers are struggling to find and maintain administrative staff. A lot of businesses in general are. And we all want to do best practices, but what are the most important things that providers should focus on regarding documentation for billing if they can't quite do everything right?
So great question. I think it's, a little difficult to answer around picking and choosing when you're talking about the revenue cycle, because that is, of course, the artery of every practice or organization. And unfortunately, staffing issues are real struggles right now. I think from my perspective, if I had to pick a few key things that everyone should be doing if they're struggling with staff and resources, documentation, billing, education, right? Educate everybody, making sure everyone understands what's required, And then auditing, right? I mean, if you're teaching everyone the right way to do things, teaching providers what has to be in the documentation based on the services that they're rendering, how are you going to support yourself if you're audited by a payer or an enforcer, making sure that all of those key components are there, and then spending the time. I mean, you don't, yes, you should be doing external audits, but internal audits are just as important. And if you don't have the resources internally to do all of those things, then you should be, reaching out, like our organizations, we do external audits all the time to help individuals to kind of do litmus tests, random focused or just random samples on focused areas to make sure they're in compliance. Mitigating risk, the two key drivers there, one is mitigating risk, and capturing, all of your potential opportunities. You want to make sure you're collecting all the revenue that you can and you should be, and at the same time, making sure that you're doing it compliantly. So yeah, it's a real big struggle.
Great, and I didn't mean to imply at all not to do everything. Billing is extremely important. Try and hit everything, but I hear from clients that they're short-staffed, and I think focusing on the big ticket issues. I do think those audits, many of our clients have done them. They're very, very helpful to find out what you've been doing right, what you've been doing wrong, to capture things. And Alicia, what are some of the top 3 coding errors that you see out there that people may keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about in our presentation, just based on the improper payment error rates from the CERT reviews. Insufficient lack of, documentation is a key driver there, which causally impacts the coding, right? So you have to have proper documentation to make sure that you have accurate coding on the back end there. And then lack of follow-up, I would say. I mean, the documentation coding, Simon mentioned every year, new codes come out, codes get deleted, descriptions get changed. It's difficult to stay up with things in the industry. Sometimes it can be a full-time job just trying to keep up with everything. So again, the documentation is critical. Making sure that you're billing for the services that you're rendering. Modifiers are a big issue when it comes to coding and billing. We see a lot of error there. So yeah, I would say those are the top few things that we see when it comes to that.
Okay, and a last question for you, and or Simon. What do you recommend people look for when they're hiring a billing company? A lot of people are outsourcing the billing due to these shortages. So what should they look for?
Yeah, I mean, I can start out, and Simon, feel free to chime in. He's got a ton of valuable information to contribute, but it's so tough. We get asked all the time, hey, can you recommend a billing company? And it is so difficult to actually do that, right? I would say really important to put together a comprehensive checklist, making sure they have compliance programs in place, understanding, their workflow strategies, how, what's their quality assurance program internal like, understanding what are they going to be responsible for, what aren't they, who's responsible for what, right? Usually the provider's responsible for the point of service care up to a certain point, which in the revenue cycle is critical components of getting the claims paid properly. So I would say clear delineation of, who's responsible for what, making sure they're following up, and see if you can get references, from industry, colleagues in the industry or other people in your specialty area. Not every billing company is going to be proficient in the types of services that you provide, right? Provider services, billing revenue cycles, very different from inpatient, very different from, AmSurge billing. So making sure that they have internal resources, expertise, compliance program, and do quality assurance testing.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. Andrew, you wanna...
All right, yeah, Tim. I don't see Tim. I don't know if he's on. Are you on there, Tim? Okay.
Well, if Tim's not there, Max, is that you on the phone? Did you make it back?
I did. Can you hear me?
Sure. Let's jump back to you for a quick question. I appreciate you finding a way to join us. Going back to your topic, one of the things we often see in transactions is the lack of consensus amongst the partners. The more experienced doctors, they're ready to cash out, take some money, chips off the table, and the newer doctors are concerned, and rightfully so, with this income scrape that we've heard all about today and losing money in the future. What can a practice do in advance of the deal to ensure that the transaction works for everyone?
Well, it's a great question. It's a difficult answer because it really does go to the culture of the group, as we often call it. The group, if it's tilted towards older doctors, as you alluded to, Greg, they typically are more so in favor of the transaction, whereas the younger ones are not because of the income scrape. So a couple things that can mitigate that particular divergent attitude would be ways that the post-transaction grow the overall corpus of the business that's being sold, or the practice, the enterprise, to grow the revenue and profits, and as a result to reduce the income scrape because the profits of the enterprise are higher. So now that's obviously a tough sell, because you've got to be able to accept the premise that in fact is going to happen, and there's no guarantees of that. But if the private equity sponsor has a track record at all, and if there's the probability that the numbers will get better through maybe perhaps better payer contracts, more overall wherewithal, better cost management, et cetera, through the MSO, then that is one way to, let's just say, convince the younger physicians to take the deal. I think on top of that, the other thing is potentially to look at the way the monies are allocated from the proceeds of the sale, and as a result, the subsequent compensation. That can be challenging because typically partnerships have equal equity, and so if you go by strictly equity in the deal, then that may make that a challenge. We have an example right now where we're working with a group, not sure why, but they're a C Corp, and it's causing a significant amount of problems because it's an orthopedic group, not surprisingly, but they want the doctors, the partners, want to distribute the proceeds of the sale in relationship to the productivity in RVUs of one doctor to the rest of the practice. And yet they're all equal owners. So needless to say, I've probably created a monster there by bringing it up. But there are to address that. And it looks like, not with some of the tax challenges, that will in fact be the case. So that could even affect the income scrape, as you alluded to. But it's a very, very challenging situation that oftentimes will kill potential private equity deals because the younger physicians simply will not vote for it. So it requires a lot of thought, analysis, both the front side and the back side.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's why we asked you. Andrew and I battle with this all the time, but good things to think about, and the growth, so you could sell it, hopefully better rates and things like that, hopefully can offset that scrape. Andrew, you want to take over? We only have a few more panels. I want to make sure we get to everyone.
Yep, definitely. So Debbie, I need you to reconcile two things to me, and this is inaudible here. So I have heard, and you're the queen of managed care, so you'll know. I've heard that payers are increasingly saying to hospitals, they won't pay for, let's say, a GI procedure in a hospital. It's got to go to lower cost settings like an ASC. And yet this morning, Bill Prentice said that Medicare only allowed one additional inpatient a procedure from inpatient to be moved to outpatient. How do I reconcile those two things for ASCs?
I think you need to kind of split your brain between Medicare, fee-for-service Medicare, and managed care. Because the fact that what Medicare is saying for fee-for-service Medicare applies only to Medicare Advantage plans. But in the commercial world, the plans have already bought into integrating cost into medical necessity. So if the plans think that they can push procedures over, regardless of what Medicare is saying, from an inpatient setting to an outpatient setting, they're going to do it. They're saving money, and we're seeing it, on the ASC side. Also, I think that's an interesting point that Bill raised. But my understanding is, I guess I don't know when, but the folks on the panel that I had earlier feel the inpatient only list will ultimately disappear. When is anybody's guess?
So, yeah, well, if it disappears, the ASCs will be happy, and the hospitals better hope that they own ASCs. Last question for you, Debbie, is, you had such an incredible panel, NYU, Mount Sinai, Catholic Health. Is there anything you heard that you disagreed that they said for ASCs?
Actually, I did. I was surprised when I asked about bundled payments and what they thought about them, that they didn't feel that they had any stickiness to it, and that they didn't see bundled payments where an ASC will have surgical fee, the anesthesia fee, maybe even go out 60 days, into post-care, had legs. And I'm seeing it I've already seen it with single specialty ASCs. So I don't know. I mean, I think that we'll see more of it down the road.
Right, you've negotiated for an ASC, yeah. Okay, Greg, back to you.
All right, so now I'm going to turn to Alexandra Reyes, Vice President of Operations for Regent. Thanks for being so patient, Alex, and for joining us today. Following up on what Andrew said, it was interesting to me that when Bill was talking about the different lines of service, and Medicare only let one ENT procedure in this year, which was shocking. Outside of Medicare, what current trends are you seeing in the ASC industry related to new service lines and new procedures that are being permitted by the carriers?
Yes, thank you, Greg. So ASC volume and revenue per case is expected to trend higher over the next 5 years. And we're looking at a growth of approximately 3 to 5% per year. And this is due to a significant shift that we're seeing of higher acuity cases that are being done in an ASC setting, like your spine procedures, anterior cervical fusions. We're seeing more and more total joint replacements done outpatient. We're also seeing a trend with cardiovascular with regards to, we're seeing the majority of the cardiovascular procedures that are being performed outpatient today includes your cardiac rhythm management, like your pacemakers, AICDs. We're also seeing more cardiac catheterizations, cardiac diagnostic and interventional procedures, peripheral vascular and diagnostic interventions. And we're also seeing more dialysis-related procedures like, creation of fistula and graft, et cetera. So I would say, if you're interested in pursuing the cardiovascular space, it's really important for you to check your state regs to see if there are any restrictions on a state level. For example, California, New York, it's restricting coronary artery work. So we're not able to do those types of cases in those states. And it's important to keep up with the market trends. I would also say that, with the shift in high acuity cases, based on what Deborah was saying, I do believe there's going to be an increase in opportunities for bundled payments. And I think that's going to be critical as well going forward in the future.
Thanks. That's great information. And you were talking about growth in your ASC, other than different lines of service. What other resources do you think you can implement to assist ASCs with their strategic growth?
Yeah, so I would say if you don't have a physician recruiter or director of business development, I think it would be key to consider hiring a physician liaison. This person would be a dedicated recruiter. They would be responsible for partnership management. They would also foster relationships with the practice managers as well as the schedulers and help to grow and develop your center's volume as well as your service lines. They would also help to facilitate physician onboarding, facilitate increasing access to your center, as well as support service line expansion initiatives. And this person would be responsible for planning, conducting in-person physician office visits, focusing on your key stakeholders at your physician offices to increase selection of your center to perform their cases. The other piece that's really important is helping your physicians to optimize their use of existing block times, increasing their access to procedure time at your centers. They could also measure your case volume growth, identify any trends, lessons learned, opportunities for improvement, as well as achieving your facility and market goals. This person would be responsible for developing physician target lists and assist with physician recruitment with external growth in your markets.
Great, thank you. So I can hear the pens jotting down, and everyone's going to be out there doing all that. Thank you, Alexandra, and all the panelists. I'll turn it back to Andrew.
Yeah, so look, big thank you to everyone. We put together a great thing, which now can be sent out into the stratosphere. For the participants, you can get on www.garfunkelwild.com, and we can send you the slide deck, and then you'll also be getting a link to the recordings. So thank you, guys. We put together a really great, substantive, thought-provoking day. So go have a drink on Greg. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Great information.
Thank